Okay, well, I think we can get started. Thank you all for joining us for this event tonight, Monstrous AI. This is a co-sponsored event with our friends and colleagues at the Center for Religion and Media at New York University. And this year we have been curating together a series of events on the theme of monsters. This is the second event. If you weren't able to join us for the first, you can see that video recording on our website and on the Center for Religion and Media's website at NYU. So please do check it out. We have more events next semester in the works. And it's been a real pleasure to be doing this with our colleagues downtown. So my name is Matthew Engelke. I'm the director of the Institute for Religion, Culture, and Public Life at Columbia University. And tonight's event is something that we put together this summer and had an inkling of that would be, a kind of ever evolving news story, as indeed it is. So I think this is a very timely event, and we're incredibly excited to have such esteemed speakers and such an esteemed moderator to share their perspectives on the ways in which we can think about artificial intelligence in relation to the monstrous and monsters. I'm going to leave it to my colleague Lydia Liu to do the introductions. I'm just going to say a few more words about the format for tonight, and then I will introduce Lydia Liu. We are running until 7 p.m. tonight here, Eastern Standard Time. Each of our panelists is going to speak for about 10 minutes, and then Lydia Liu will engage them in a kind of moderated conversation for 20 to 30 minutes, and then there will be time for questions from you in the audience. So please do feel free at any point, really from here on out, to type your questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You don't have to wait until the panelists are done speaking. If a question occurs to you, please feel free to send it along. And Professor Liu will be able to read out a selection of those at the end. I also want to just thank, I thanked our friends downtown. I also want to thank the staff here at IRCPL for their incredible work in putting this event together tonight and for making it possible behind the scenes. So with all of that said, let me just say a few words of introduction about Lydia Liu. I am so pleased to welcome her to the IRCPL space here online. Lydia is someone who I've gotten to know over the past few years as a colleague here at Columbia, had the pleasure of teaching a course with her, and was able to get a sense of just how broad her interests are. She is the Wonsun Tam Professor of the Humanities in the Department of East Asian Languages and Cultures here at Columbia. She works on Chinese literature, she works on translation theory, she works on media technologies. And throughout all of that, she's also had a longstanding interest in the connections between philosophy of language and computing, robotics, and increasingly artificial intelligence. She's the author of numerous books, and recently in the past few years, articles to include at least 2 articles in Critical Inquiry that touch directly on some of the themes for tonight. So I'm so glad that she is able to join us as the moderator and to contribute her perspective and insights. So I am very happy now to turn over to Lydia and to the panelists. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. It's a great pleasure to join this distinguished panel and also to meet the audience. As you all know, AI is very much in the news these days and on our minds. Earlier this year, Geoffrey Hinton, the so-called godfather of AI, came out to announce that humans can no longer control their AI creations. And he predicts that AI will cause the extinction of the human species sooner than we think, and even provides a timeline for that. According to his and others who also went along with him, according to their description, AI will take our jobs and immerse us in the hallucinatory worlds of disinformation and will lead to fake content and cause generalized moral breakdowns. So your average persons will not be able to tell what is true and what is false. Apparently, the AI CEOs and ex-CEOs are playing the role of Dr. Frankenstein, who fears the monster he has created. And so it is time that we should attend to the demonic and the monstrous that the panelists together will discuss today. I'm going to introduce our panelists who come from different disciplines and in the order of their discussion. Professor Lydia Chilton is an assistant professor in computer science department at Columbia University. Her research is in computational design, how computation and AI can help people with design, innovation, and creative problem solving. The applications would include creating media for journalism, developing technology for public libraries, improving risk communication during hurricanes, helping scientists explain their work, and improving mental health in marginalized communities. Dr. Chilton received her bachelor's degree in computer science from MIT in 2007, her master's in engineering from MIT in 2009, and her PhD from the University of Washington in 2016. She was a postdoctoral fellow at Stanford before joining Columbia Engineering in 2017 as a faculty member. Our next speaker is Professor Philip Butler, who is Assistant Professor of Theology and Black Posthuman Artificial Intelligence Systems at the Iliff School of Theology. His work focuses on the intersections of neuroscience, technology, spirituality, and Blackness. He is also the founder of the Seeker Project, a distinctly Black conversational artificial intelligence with mental health capabilities. He is also partner director of Iliff's AI Institute, where he leads the 80/20 project. This institute works to change how computers see people. And Professor Butler is also the author of Black Transhuman Liberation Theology, and most recently, the editor of another book called Critical Black Futures. He's currently working on his second monograph called Still Black Posthuman. Now, our third speaker is Professor Timothy Beal, who is Distinguished University Professor and a Lawrence Harkness Professor of Religion at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. He is also the director of a lab called Edge Lab. And he's part of a newly funded initiative in experimental humanities focused on integrating humanities and technology through hands-on engagement with and critical reflection on new computational tools and methods. He has published 16 books, including a new edition of Religion and Its Monsters, with a new chapter entitled Gods, Monsters, and Machines, Artificial Intelligence in the Anthropocene. I very much look forward to your discussion of Monstrous AI, all three panelists. We'll start with Professor Chilton then.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here. I'm going to start with a short PowerPoint presentation because to start this conversation, first of all, other Lydia, is this visible? Looks good. Okay. I wanted to start this conversation with a grounding as what is AI? As I've given talks about my work and AI in general, I've realized that a lot of people haven't just been told what it actually is. So if we're going to start imagining whether or not it's a monster, let's start with some basics. Okay, so I call this Gen AI 101. It's 10 slides, so, and there's no homework. So, okay, so I get that AI seems to be taking over the world. It's generating text, images, code. What can't it do? Okay. And there's this general fear that AI is going to put people out of a job. There's a meme that really touched my heart online where everyone's saying AI is going to make designers obsolete. AI may or may not be doing as good a job as we think it is. These models get better, but they have a big fundamental limitation. So whereas it is impressive, it is far from perfect. It does not know what's true. It can't evaluate what outputs are good and what people will like. Its answers are pretty basic. It's summarized what's already been written or seen on the internet. So what is the technology? They're all a little bit different, but GPT is sort of the one that caught people's imagination. It has an input and it goes through this big, what we call a black box, but it's a lot less scary than that. And then you output something that just continues that prompt. Okay, so we all know it. So, but how does it do it? Okay, it is just learning to predict the next word in a sentence from the entire internet of examples. So if you have ever completed a friend's thought or sentence because you know them and you know the kinds of things they say, that's all it's doing. It's just running a bunch of numbers. What's the most likely thing that's going to be said next based on what I know about things said on the internet? So that's actually, it's just predicting a word. That's all it is. And you've seen it in Gmail Smart Compose. You can, okay, so then the images are just, how does DALL-E 2, 3, 4, whatever, generate images? Takes an image like this one of a cat, it adds some noise to it, so it makes the image worse, and then it tries to predict what the original image was. So it's recovering and you can just make that noisier and noisier until from almost no cat in there, you can start to synthesize a cat. But still, it's just based on all the cats that it's seen on the internet before. So it does have real applications. Smart Compose was probably the first one, not particularly scary. I don't know that people saw the monster in this, but as it gets bigger and bigger, both the computers, the algorithms, we can just do more than 1 or 2 words at a time. And it can also do, things like translation with the same general purpose. Like if I have these words in English and or I have these words in French, what's the most likely word that it means in English, just based on translations that I've seen before. So this can be really useful, but it definitely has limitations. So why should you be impressed? And why is this different than previous AI? Because we've had sort of AI before. What's a little bit scary about this is that it doesn't need to be trained to do any particular task. So this is crazy. All we told it to do was predict words, predict pixels, and based on that, there's all these things that it seems to be able to do without being trained to do it. So it can summarize, it can translate, it can get the keywords, it can generate ideas, it can rewrite text to be more concise or to avoid plagiarism detectors, and it wasn't told to do any of these things. this is sometimes called emergent behaviors. And this is a little scary. This is where the tripwires of fear often go off in people's brains, because now we can't say for sure what it can and cannot do. And we don't know how. We do know how it's doing it, but we don't have, because it's such a big model. Like we know that it's just predicting the next word, but we don't know how well it's going to do because we don't have a full model of how it works. That said, a lot of things are like that. We don't fully know how the economy works. We don't fully know how the brain works, like any of these things. But you see enough examples and you sort of get an idea. However, and I think people have, at the beginning of these models, it was like, wow, we could do anything. But like then we kind of calm down and realize, okay, here are some of the things that it can do well, and they're sort of akin to what's on this list. Okay. So I personally am not so worried about the fate of humanity, not nearly as much as Geoffrey Hinton is or was in that interview. And the real reason why, of all these facts, is it's just making average predictions. And average is far from good. And most people can tell what's really, really good and what's just average. We've all seen like Hallmark movies. Maybe around Christmas time, they feel good. And I'm pretty sure AI could probably write some of those because they're really, really similar to all the ones before. But you don't want a life that's full of just those kinds of movies. You want all sorts of rich things. And people are great at saying like what's actually new and good and what they like and what's just garbage that we've seen before. Computers will get better at classifying this as well. Anyway, so that is my main message, that average is far from good. I personally have just seen in my history in computer science all the, basically every technology is going to destroy humanity. Deepfakes were going to destroy humanity. Coursera was going to destroy universities, and then human photographs were supposed to destroy art. I'm personally more worried about global warming as a monster than I am about AI. And so I just want us to be mindful of the history of like, well, every technology, particularly the ones that we don't understand and seem to have human-like behaviors, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they hold up to the fears that we have about them. And in terms of us being unable to control it, that depends on what we're willing to do. I think I'm actually just more worried about the kind of fake news people are actually spreading without AI than I am with the ones that they could with AI. So that is my brief spiel about what AI is. I would actually love to hear from other panelists before I say any more.
Would Philip then take over this conversation?
Sure. So I'll jump in. Good evening, everybody. Really glad to be here and be a part of this conversation. I'm excited to share this with you, at least kind of hang out for a little bit. My style of presentation and conversation is trash talking, so I hope that everybody's willing to have a little bit of fun with me. And so at least my contribution to the conversation is really going to be around 3 questions. And those questions, just to give you a bit of a preface, right? The first one is, what is a monster? The second one is, why do we fear what we make? And then the third question is, what are we going to do to shift our ways of being with monsters or creating things? So I'm not going to answer them all. I'm just going to, hang out with these questions for a little bit. So here we go. So when we talk about what a monster is, we're roughly describing something that is either a combination of us having kind of superhuman abilities or extra personal abilities, probably something that is a deity of sorts, and that is also coupled with something that's considered like maybe a category of a lesser class, right? And so we have like this subhuman thing that probably functions in ways that probably scare us, given that we've categorized it as problematic or a threat, while simultaneously recognizing its ability to do things that we can't do. And so it sounds roughly around the ways in which we've, I guess, heard these conversations over the last year and a half, especially with the GPT kind of craze about folks. AI thinks faster than us, right? It can do such and so forth. But as Lydia pointed out, right, the average is not super good, but there are some things that it does do well, right? Especially when, right, there are people who can't code but could ask GPT, right? Could you write this line? Can you solve this problem for me, or help me, better understand this particular line of code that's giving me some issues? Or can you do these computational things much faster than I could? And so we see that it has these kind of superhuman abilities, right? But categorically, we would say, and by we, I'm using kind of like a general population kind of conversation. Folks would say that, right, this AI, especially like a GPT or these kind of generative models, right, they're not human, right? They're less than human. They don't necessarily fit you know, check the boxes of what a human is, especially given that, it's a disembodied thing. And its disembodiment is also kind of coupled with like a kind of performative sentience. And by performative sentience, roughly just describing the ways in which you can have kind of this contextual-ish, right, conversation with these generative models, come back 10 minutes later and start over and do the same thing again. And so it suggests, right, that it looks and sounds like it's doing something, but the thing that it is performing is not actually doing in the ways that we understand, right? Kind of sentience or memory, right, or recall, right, to the function. But I think even more so, we start talking about like the monsters, right? There's also kind of subcategories of monsters, and then we think about this in terms of like the demonic. Um, Sylvia Winter talks about the demonic in a very particular way, and we see scholars such as Catherine McKittrick or Zakiya Mon Jackson kind of pick up this conversation around the demonic, and so they actually pull from um, physics and mathematics, right? And we talk about, right, these demonic formulas or demonic kind of numbers is really kind of a conversation around the things that we can't control. And so we've already kind of heard a little bit about the ways that this black box functions that are kind of that still act as mysteries to us, right? And so these large models, large set of data, right? You even with vectorizing and so on and so forth, some of these kind of these tools that we use to help kind of create barriers around the outputs of these generative models. We still don't actually know in a very traceable way how things come to the surface the way that they do, aside from the kind of predictive formats. And so talking about the demonic in this way, it also raises questions, right, about not only what we can or cannot control, but it also raises questions about what it means then for these things to be in our kind of social sphere, uh, whether they be, right, again, kind of in our immediate social sphere, whether they be in our kind of humanistic social sphere, or they just are added to a social sphere, right, given the way in which folks are putting themselves in these kind of dialectic relationships that have these kind of co-creative qualities, and co-creative meaning that AI continues to grow as we continue to contribute to it, and we continue to shift as we see this thing shift alongside us, right? So again, this kind of takes us to the second question. I'm just trying to make sure I'm being mindful of time here. The second question about, why do we fear what we make? And I think this speaks right to, a kind of a common conjecture around humanity that humans don't like change. And so if we were to take this question seriously, then we'd also be looking at the ways in which there are some people who are very intentional about making change happen, right? And so in this case, we're looking at, kind of the ML engineers, the data scientists, or the folks who are engaging in the construction of these generative models and these kind of unique data sets or these large language data sets in a way that now we're at the point where we don't fully understand how things are coming to the surface. But again, we also can't control each and every output. And so as things continue, right, to evolve and these computational models begin to produce things that again that seemingly sound more and more quote unquote human, we're also in a relationship with these machines and these models, whether you think about this in terms of like a human in the loop, or even a computer in the loop, where people are making decisions, but they're asking, right, the computers to kind of co-sign on their decisions or to help them make the decision in a more definitive way. and or where the machines are part of the decision-making process, but people have to kind of double check to make sure that the machines aren't necessarily going off the rails, even though we've seen that people are less likely, right, to check the machines in a way that is kind of oppositional, in a way that they would normally, kind of be questioning people, right? So the propensity is to question other people with a sense of, a level of intensity or skepticism, but that skepticism somehow seems to dwindle a bit when it comes to the machines. And so I being a post-humanist and a Black post-humanist specifically, right? I always kind of opt for personhood or peoplehood over kind of humanity. And so if people being in the local and complex spaces, that's my definition for people. The idea is more so, can people come to the place where the fear is not so much around control, but it's more so again around sociality, which takes me to the last question, right? How are we going to kind of shift our way of being with monsters and or created things? And so I remember when I was teaching undergrads, we would talk about like the body and machines or artificial, right, and the quote unquote organic. And I would say, so what isn't natural, or what qualifies natural? And they would say anything that's not man-made. And so I kind of jokingly, I would say, so how are you made then? Right? Is that everybody has kind of a lab that they go into, whether it be test tube or, a bedroom of sorts, right? And there's a compilation of ingredients and, after incubation period, right? Somehow people are made. And so I do this to challenge, right, in many ways, right, this kind of notion of man-madeness as a differentiator between quote unquote nature, man and the organic of sorts. And I do that mainly because kind of similar to what, just kind of piggybacking again off what Lydia was saying, right? This idea of like sustainability or nature and so on and so forth. We talk about AI or created things. If we are a part of the larger landscape of created things, then it also puts us in a position to be both subjects and objects at the same time, which then uh, puts the ball in our court in terms of how we then will choose to, or at the very least, recognize that if we are made up, then the very things that we make are part of this particular continuum of quote unquote real and or artificial things. And so it also allows us to now be in a, I guess it gives us the opportunity, at the very least, to be in a different sort of relationship, meaning that if these things that are quote unquote monsters that have these both sub and superhuman qualities, if these things are a part of this larger landscape of uncertainty, right? If the world in and of itself is a quote unquote dangerous place, which is why people engage in the act of creating, right, technological things or conceptual techniques, as as some folks would say. If the construction of our social, political, and just kind of conceptual environments, but it's kind of also epistemic kind of framing is the comp uh, the comp. I guess what's what I'm looking for. It comes together to make what we understand reality to be, right? Then why can't we then reimagine the ways in which we relate to the things that not only that we make, but also these generative models that have the opportunity to show us different aspects about ourselves, and then move to different spaces of relational being that don't necessarily function in a hierarchical fashion, but maybe allow for a different type of exchange that might be not so much more equitable, but at the very least be different, and lend us towards a different understanding of what we are and who we are in relationship with and where we're going. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's my time.
Thank you, Philip. We move to Tim now. Tim.
Hi, thank you. Thanks thanks to the Institute and the Center for organizing this, and great to be with you, colleagues, for this conversation. So I come to this conversation as a religionist who's spent several years now, learning the coding language of Python and computational methods, and experimenting with those around natural language processing and machine learning and machine translation. And I'm interested in the relationship between religion and technology in the Anthropocene, religion and technology on the horizon of environmental collapse, if you will. And I've really enjoyed the learning from everyone so far. I think another way of thinking about the monstrous is that the monstrous is that which seems to blur the line between self and other. The monstrous represents a kind of otherness within sameness, beyond the pale that has somehow, to our horror, made its way into the pale. Monsters are revelations or epiphanies, literally demonstrations of the other within. And so the monstrous, I think Philip was and Lydia were both getting at this. The monstrous monsters always say more about us than they do about themselves. They reveal things about us and our culture. Often I find that encounters with the monstrous are expressed or represented as a kind of religious experience, an encounter with a kind of mysterious otherness that elicits this vertiginous mix of fear and fascination. One early religionist from the early 20th century, Rudolf Otto, described religious experience as an encounter with what he called mysterium tremendum et fascinans, a mystery that is both terrifying, tremendum, and at the same time fascinating, this sort of paradoxical combination of attraction and repulsion. And I think that is often part of our response to the monstrous, are the ways we describe our encounters with the monstrous. And that's certainly true with AI as a kind of monstrum tremendum et fascinans. But that's a certain kind of, I think that AI and other machines, we've already been talking about other kinds of machines as monstrous as well, that it's a certain kind of blurring of the distinction between self and other that Philip, I think you were getting at in talking about making and artifice, and that is a blurring between the creator and the creature. Something becomes monstrous when a creature becomes monstrous. Something made becomes monstrous when it becomes too much like its creator, or maybe even surpasses its creator, or at least creates that anxiety that it might surpass its creator. And I think in the West, this goes all the way back to Genesis 1-3, to that early creation story in which the creator creates humankind in the creator's image. The creation eats from the tree of knowledge. And what does the creator say in Genesis 3? Nietzsche loved this. The creator says, look, they have become as one of us, eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. If they eat from the tree of life too, they're just going to become gods. We have to kick them out. And so there's this anxiety in that story where the creator God is worried that the creature is going to become as one of us. And we see that running then all the way through all kinds of other stories. Frankenstein is a great example where Frankenstein's monster, really kind of blurs that line between creator and creature. Blade Runner and Westworld. And now with AI, we've got this sort of, behold, the machine has become as one of us, to our great fear and fascination sometimes. And it's interesting to me as a religionist that oftentimes that moment when the creature becomes too like the creator, it's represented as a kind of animism, right? A kind of coming to life in which some sort of ghost in the machine, some anima, awakens, and the machine becomes alive, becomes a living being, has become as one of us. So monsters, or AI is a kind of monster of our own making. I don't think there is any such thing as monsters in one sense. We make our own monsters, but once made, we kind of imagine it taking on a life of its own. Behold, the machine has become as one of us, even maybe transcending us. This kind of unheimlich hierophany of godlike machinic transcendence. But back to Lydia Chilton's concern about global warming and thinking about this in that context, I think that fear and fascination that we have and that we seem kind of obsessed with regard to AI these days is a kind of mystification that can distract us from the planetary costs of AI. That mystification can mask the AI industry's rapidly expanding global practices of extraction. We tend to think of or imagine AI and machine learning as almost immaterial, like it's just a bunch of code up in the cloud somewhere. But I'm really indebted. I've learned a lot from Kate Crawford's book, the Atlas of AI, it's called, and she talks about computation, global computation, as this sort of marriage of. She's really talking about 5 or 6 major companies. We know which ones they are. That are a kind of marriage of technology and capital and power that depend entirely on unsustainable practices of extraction. And we're not just talking about extraction of data, and we talk a lot about extraction of our data. We're also talking about extraction of minerals, extraction of land, extraction of labor, extraction of life. It strikes me in many ways that global computation, when we see it that way, is not unlike a kind of late capitalist version of the medieval imperial Roman Catholic Church. This global network of power that depends entirely on unsustainable extraction of land, of earth, of life, and of labor. And so with Lydia, I'm a lot more anxious about that than I am that the machines are going to take over. I'll finish there now.
Thank you all 3 panelists, for your very specific insights on AI. I think it's good that Lydia was trying to take down AI a notch, a big notch. So in your discussion of generative AI 101, we learned that we're just dealing with predictive language models, and it's just it's not that scary at all. So it's always helpful for us to keep in mind that we've heard in the news a lot of hype, and we need to consult the specialists about what exactly this technology consists of. So I think especially what Lydia, what you said about emergent behavior, but you didn't really elaborate on that. And then would you say Jeffrey Hinton was justified to make the kind of predictions, or was he hyping? And because clearly you see the companies that Tim just referred to immediately got their stocks up. And how do you connect the dots? Was he hyping? But they did seriously go to the White House, and they tried to make a plea there. So what exactly, in your view, they are up to? If we are indeed, if we need to take this down, it's not so scary. AI is just like any new technology. When it first came on the scene, like the printing technology, it has such an impact on social life. And it seems, in your view, that AI is just one of those. And so I would like to hear more from you as to whether you disagree with Hinton what your assessment of the hype is, and what is it all about? And I think from Philip, your 3 points are very well taken. And I have learned, it's really a matter of what it means for AI to be part of our social life. And that's something we really need to think about. The kind of human-machine entanglement that you analyze can help us situate the whole problem, fear, anxiety in a larger social landscape. And so then we really move beyond just the technology itself. We cannot but consider the social impact, not only that, but the identity of the technology itself as part of social life, be it a political economy or religious experience. So the technology itself is already part of social life. And so, Philip, I wonder what you make of all that hype as well, from your perspective. What exactly going on there? Tim, I think, thank you for clarifying what the Monstrous does, and that what you call, it's what blurs self and other, and the blurring of the line between the creator and the creature, and that is what is so scary. So I wanted to hear more from you about the sources of that anxiety. You mentioned unheimlich, the uncanny sources of that. You must have a lot to say about that. Sources of the anxiety. Is it unique to AI? Is it because AI is more effective in terms of blurring that boundary than any of the other technologies? And then the final point you made is incredibly important, I think, in response to Lydia's earlier remark about the about global warming as to what we need to fear the most. If we think about AI as not just one thing, but many things, we can certainly think about the political economy of AI in terms of what Tim just pointed out of the elaborate extraction, not only of data, but also labor, minerals, life, land, and many other things impacting the entire world, because we're talking about global network AI development. So you see, we started with a very basic demonstration of what generative AI is all about, moving through the human-machine entanglement as to where we should really be looking for an answer as to our own anxiety and our struggle to survive in today's climate. And then to a broader conception of AI and its relation to the capitalist machine of extraction. I'm not going to ask you to comment on all aspects of it, because I think you've already touched on that. I just wanted to start with Lydia, and my question is very specific. What is your take on Hinton's and Elon Musk and all of these CEOs hype about AI and their dangers, and then things that I feel skeptical about, even though I'm not in your field. So I would love to have your perspective on this?
Okay, I can say one true thing. Nobody knows the future. Not me, not Jeffrey Hinton, not any of you guys, just God. So Jeffrey Hinton is a very smart person. That doesn't mean that he can see the future. So he has thoughts, but like just because he says so doesn't mean it's going to happen. Him as the father, he's an AI expert. He's not a humanity expert. We get these things confused. Just because you did your PhD and you did some miraculous things in one area does not mean that that translates to some general genius or intelligence. So I don't know. I don't know the future either. So I can't tell you whether that's true or but for him, I've only met him once. I do feel like he's a genuine person. Doesn't mean that, but I can tell you everybody feels fear. Smart people feel fear, that we don't all deal with it in the most rational ways. I do believe, and I know for a fact, that one way to get a lot of attention is fear mongering. I think some people are doing that. Do I personally think Jeffrey Hinton is doing that? No, but I don't know him well enough to really say. But I can say it sells more headlines to say AI is taking your job than to say that it isn't. Fear sells. If it bleeds, it leads. So there's a lot of reasons to think that you're hearing one version of the story, and they're all projections of the future that nobody knows. So there's many, many different paths, and you're sort of hearing one of them a lot. So, and if we look at history, like none of us, the jobs that our great-grandparents did mostly don't exist anymore. So jobs do change over time. I get the fear of, will I be useless tomorrow? I mean, of these industries, I think probably the one that has changed the most is computer science. Just like Philip was saying, you don't really know how to code anymore. You can just say in English, make me an app that does this. And, you break it down, you can get pretty far. Actually, that's not quite true. You do still have to have a lot of expertise on how to teach it, how to train it, how to make sure it's doing it right. So it's actually more complicated than just make me an app and it does it. There's anyway, but nobody knows the future. If I break down Jeffrey Hinton's arguments, all of those problems are very solvable, and we know how to solve them. So misinformation rampant on the internet, we can not allow anonymous posting, and we can have moderators that fact check. These are solvable problems. We choose not to do them. At least in the US, our ideals of freedom of speech sort of get in the way of that, and there's some issues we have to wrestle with in terms of what our norms are, and even some of the law scholars have like, freedom of speech wasn't all that good of an idea, and we know it has limits, right? You can't shout fire in a crowded room. When it has deleterious effects, we rethink these things. Laws and norms. So here's what is a little bit scary, is that it's hard for society to change its laws and norms as fast as these new technologies seem to be developing. And so it has this fear that I can't catch up, because the way our brains work is we need to see lots and lots of examples over and over again. Like, to get good at basketball or writing or piano, it takes you 15 years to retrain your brain. But these technologies are happening every 3 years, 4 years. I just got used to social networks and how to promote myself there. And now I can learn this whole other thing. So there is this constant feeling of being overwhelmed when I just think of all the technology. So that is, I do believe, new and real, but I don't think the underlying problems are unsurmountable. I think we can fix them if they happen. And remember, deep fakes were supposed to destroy our trust in humanity as well. We're all here 10 years later. I don't think that deep fakes are a huge part of our lives. And all the things that he's saying have already happened on the internet, and we're still here. So I just want to note how many times we've been still here after all those things, and just say nobody knows the future, no matter how smart they are.
Thank you, Lydia. That's reassuring. So let's see. All that hype is about attention grabbing, and they are incredibly successful in grabbing people's attention. In the same month, past May, Hollywood writers went on strike, actors went on strike, and I have seen some of their posters, which says AI or Alexa is not going to replace us. So it's part of the strike. Yeah, so there's some, if you were to tell them that your grandma's position will eventually be eliminated, would they be convinced? And the strike went on for 4 months, and eventually they reached an agreement. And so in other words, we're in the midst of this upheaval. You're absolutely right. The legal and the other institutions cannot catch up with the fast developing technology. Absolutely, that is what's going on. But it's reassuring to hear from you that computer science jobs will not be taken yet. Some other jobs might be taken, but the day will arrive when AI will do the coding, so students don't have to learn the coding. Well, so Philip, do you want to reflect on some of this?
Yeah, sure. I think I, in many ways, what we're looking at is kind of a materialization of some transhumanist kind of futures, right? So I think part of the argument or the aim or the goal of a transhumanist future is to create technologies that take care of every job, so that people have the leisure to do what they please. Now, what is often kind of missed or overlooked is what happens in the meantime. Like, so, all right, if the jobs are handed over or taken over by machines, so that humans can be free to pursue art or intellectual curiosities or to build things, that's cool. But how are people going to live on a day to day? And so, right, these are where questions about like basic incomes, basic access, and assets come into the conversation. But it also raises questions about how we even get there, right? People are not very clear about, or even in agreement about this notion of UBIs or UBAs and so on and so forth. But this is still part of like a particular kind of manifesto of sorts, whereby machines and models and so on and so forth are going to enter different industries in order to create a greater ease of life, right, for certain populations over others. And so I think part of what we're witnessing is the way that the populations that are most affected are the ones whose jobs are at risk, given the way that these models and that these robots or different types of machines have the capacity, right, to engage in the type of labor that these folks once did. And so I mean, you're and many they're often up against, right, this notion of what, like when we talk, I think Tim highlighted, right, this idea of like the blurriness of identities. Um, that also suggests that people have one particular identity. And I know that people, there's often kind of this notion that identity is tethered, right, to jobs, right? Like my last name is Butler. Some folks' last name is Baker, so on and so forth, right? Like there's a nomenclature often connected, right, historically, right, between what people do from the day to day, right, and how they understand themselves. But as we see, right, the kind of speed, right, that the acceleration of these technologies offer, we're also putting people kind of in a spin cycle, whereby now the question of who they are, whether they're human at all, whether humans exist at all, so on and so forth, they're coming to the surface much faster, which has these kind of dizzying qualities, right? And am I this? Am I that? Should I be this? Should I be that? should my job be here or not, right? And I mean, I know, yeah, and which raises the question, like, so then who's in control, right? And, some people may offer that as this is a theological question, but then you can also, so you can take this, notion of like, all right, is there a deity that can control all of this, that is controlling all of this and is okay with this? There's another question of does it matter if said deity is okay with this? And then there's the other question is, does the deity even exist at all? And you can go a lot of different ways, right? In terms of like the future or jobs and so forth. And in many ways, we've seen through history, it doesn't matter what God wants, and it also doesn't matter if God's going to intervene, because God does not necessarily intervene historically in these types of things. So it's really up to the people who are a part of, right, this particular landscape. Right, what ways are people going to be part of this in terms of building it up? What ways are people going to work together with different governing municipalities or larger governments to work towards something like a UBI, UBA? But then you also have the question of whether or not, this is something that people are really going to revolt against, right? And kind of demand this more analogic approach to being with one another, and the types of jobs that um, some industries would like to see dissipate, some folks would try to hold on to. And so, this is where a lot of things are coming to the fore in terms of utility, personal utility, identity utility, the utility of having an identity at all, right? In terms of like, what does it mean to be a fluid identity person? And this is not solely around gender and sex, but it also is about how you approach life and, how you gain a sense of purpose, so on and so forth. And so, I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways in which we can kind of look at this, but it also is probably good to keep in mind, right, the ways in which the transhumanist future are very much so kind of hell bent on maintaining, historical hierarchies, right, and keeping, certain people in certain strata versus others, right. So this is also a question of what does it mean then to know what transhumanists are after, know what technologists are kind of working towards, and then either be subversive, right? Either be find ways to make localized technologies, but also be part of the larger conversation about kind of being open to reimagining who you are, what you can be. And so, if you can be anything, what can you be now? And how might that reflect, generationally, right, within the next, 20 to 100 years?
Thank you, Philip. Tim, can we have your thoughts on any of these comments on my original question?
Well, it's a great question, and I really great discussion. I think part of what we're circling around when we're talking about acceleration and speed and control and anxiety about that is questions about agency, especially in relation to technology. These are old, big questions, right, for philosophy and theology, free will versus determinism and that sort of thing. I like to think of technology generally. I get this from Ursula Le Guin, that technology is an active human interface with the more than human world. So we make technologies that serve as ways of connecting with the more than human world. We make technology, and then technology makes us, right? And so we're always in that kind of dynamic that leaves us asking about our sense of agency, whether we're talking about a wheel or whether we're talking about the printing press or whether we're talking about, a classroom, or whether we're talking about various computational methods like machine learning. We make them and then they make us, and they shape, as Marshall McLuhan said, the medium is the message, and the most important message of any medium, any media technology, any technology, is its social effect. That's the real message of a technology. So how it shapes the ways, as Philip was talking about, how it shapes the ways we relate to one another and live with one another. And to what extent do we control that? And to what extent are we really being made by what we have made, right? And that gets back to that question Philip asked earlier about why we fear what we make, which I thought was a great question.
Thank you, Tim. Lydia, do you have any further thoughts on this discussion? I think we really have a real conversation going. Please.
Yeah, so why do we fear it? Let's say that we factor out what trying to predict the future, good or bad effects. Maybe it'll turn out to destroy humanity, maybe, but like regardless, why are we fearing it right now? Because there's certainly been technologies like Facebook that we didn't fear that went on and had huge repercussions on elections and whatever, that like came out of nowhere. Other ones would be like Photoshop, which, you know, the ability to change what people look like has created body image issues for that portray unrealistic, so like there have been technologies that have flown under the radar but have created big problems. Frequency trading, possibly one of them. Anyway, so why do we fear this one? Let's just think about our fears. Agency, purpose, like, what is my purpose here? I think Philip was describing a lot of our last names, like what we do is a part of our identity. And there's a future, like the Star Trek future, where we get to all, pursue art and whatever, because, robots can make the food and all the jobs. But until we get there, like that interim, like we have to let go maybe of that, our job and our intelligence and all this school that I went to for so many years is what makes me me. That's really scary. Nothing is scarier than change. Some changes, we just have to reassess. We have to find new ways of doing things. It costs us time, energy, money, and this identity thing that really exists, although I can't put my finger on it anywhere. It's very real. And there are, somebody mentioned in the QA, there are definitely people that have lost their jobs. That is real. That is definitely very scary. Even if it weren't from AI, even if it was from like like this past year was the great firing in computer science. It was really scary to see a lot of my colleagues all at once have that. And, and they're people that can like figure it out anyway, but like, is the whole industry crumbling? I'm like, no, their stocks went back up, and so now they hired people back. So it's also just like a little crazy. The idea that we have to change things is definitely hard. There are also wrinkles in this. Like, one of the things that I genuinely fear the most, that we will put too much trust in AI, and this happened, and fire everybody, and then not have people that can do these things. So there was a company that said they were going to have, they were going to replace all their mental health service operators with robots, and it like absolutely, I think it was for eating disorders, and it was not trained for this. It said all sorts of horrible, exactly the wrong things. So like, why would you do that without testing it? Like, that's but that was a human decision to replace everybody with robots without testing it more than once, so really, I blame the people in that scenario. And anyway, when things take on a sense of agency, like we sort of have given to AI because it's a chat bot, it has a lot of the metaphors that we use with people. We start to give it a persona, a personality, but really, you have to blame people for the things that people do. And the decision to use an AI was a person's decision in that case, without testing it, without making sure it was true. So I blame that person, not the AI. So we also, right. So anyway, so going back to people being fired, like, or losing their jobs, a lot of those are terrible. Some of them will, it's sort of of the moment, we're overly projecting how much AI can do. I think that's very true in the arts cases. One of the strike people who was a writer had this great sign. I won't be able to paraphrase. It's exactly true. Chat GPT doesn't have enough childhood trauma to write good TV. Absolutely true. Like, these things, like, so the qualities that humans really want, like, also AI isn't a farmer. It can't make food. We still need food. That's one job that we had 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2 million years ago, probably still exists. Storytelling has also been, and we want good stories. It is true that there are some jobs like translator that are very within the realm of computers to do. But I would argue if I could factor out the feelings of any one person translator who might have lost their job, I think it's pretty great that there's all this automatic translation so I can like talk to my in-laws, over chat. Like, so we're also kind of benefiting globally from some of the information gains that we are getting here. For example, I would really like my doctor to make the best possible diagnosis. And if that means he gets to type it into Chat GPT to check what it thinks, I'm happy with that. So at some point we have to think about what's the best outcome overall, regardless of whether what one individual's fears of losing their job might be. It would be great if we had pathways to help people transition to other related jobs, because that makes it a little less, and those things exist. Maybe that's the article I should go, right? If AI is doing this part of your job, there's always some other part of your job that you also do that's important. So AI doesn't do like the cultural translation parts of it, for example, or like interpret meaning correctly. And so there's a lot of things rather than just kind of looking up in a dictionary what words mean in one language and what's the English for that. So anyway, I do think there's a much bigger spectrum here of just like some people will lose their jobs. I think things really shift in complicated ways. Those ways are not clear right now, but I think they could be, and we could help more. And as technological change gets faster, we need to just get used to switching more, thinking more flexibly. It will be hard, but it is definitely possible.
It will be hard. Thank you. Will Philip and Tim have things to add? Because I see there are some great questions in the Q&A. People have typed some great questions. Before we move there, do you have any last minute final thought?
No, that's fine.
I'm sorry, Philip, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was saying no, so go ahead, sir.
Well, someone in the Q&A just now raised a question that I was thinking too, which is who's the we? And I've been using the we in a general way, and we were just saying we need to be adapting and so forth. And this might come back around to the sort of, industrial drive of these technologies. I'm not sure that they're necessarily interested in a very broad we. This maybe gets back to extraction and gets back to agency as well. Some of us have more agency and more privilege in these different contexts than others do. And questions around automation always raise that. But just in terms of back to control and agency, and remembering that most of what's happening right now with global computation, as Kate Crawford calls it, has maybe different interests than in local particular communities that might suffer.
Thank you. Since we have already started responding to some of the questions, I would like to mention one question which is directly related to what we were discussing earlier, that is agency. Lydia and Tim, you were talking about agency. And there is a question from a member of the audience that says the fear of AI also involves bad actors, military applications underway, risk of cyber attacks that can down grids, terrorism utility. Is that a concern for Monstrous AI? Sorry for posting so much, but it seems that the panel has totally ignored the most pressing concerns about the future of AI. Would any of you like to take this question?
Yeah, I'll jump in here first. Yeah, in my first book, I was basically telling one of the arguments is that if you're not a progenitor of the technology, then you're always going to be kind of at the discretion of the folks who either make it or deploy it on a regular basis. And so Uh, Thank you for pointing that out. I also would suggest, right, that if it's a concern, then it's probably a good space to jump in. I think AI is also kind of like the fore of a new kind of civic space of sorts, and the civic space is not necessarily like voting, like going to a set of polls, right? But given right the ease through which something like a generative model might be able to help folks, make new things, whether it be a line of code or whatever. You may have to team up with folks who know some stuff a bit more squarely, but the idea is still the same. If that is a concern, and as it should be, right, it's also something. It's also an opportunity for people to jump in to this larger conversation, right? That's being kind of formed as we speak. Um, like fears are valid, right? Because they tell us a little bit about the world that we live in, right? There's a kind of a notion that your bodies are informing you about what's going on in the world, right, through the emotions you experience, right? Anger is a valid emotion, probably because there's something deep inside you knows there's something about this is not right. Fear is similar in the sense that the outside environment is presenting a stimulus that your body suggests is saying that this is probably a threat in some ways, but at the same time, underneath the initial kind of somatic response, there's something else to be said about how to then approach right that same threat that might come with a different approach than other people have taken to it. And I say this not in a flip way, but more so as an invitation, right? If this is something that we find as a dire need or something for us to kind of combat against, I also would just say, man, that and this might be a good place to jump in, especially right? If you're reimagining who you're going to be in the next 5 to 10 years, right? This is a conversation that's right with folks that need to be kind of jumping into the space to be able to kind of shape how this turns out, because you know what 3 years ago and you couldn't hold a contextual, conversation. So I imagine in the next 6 months to a year, not only will you be able to walk away in 10 minutes, but the generative models that you have that conversation, they'll probably remember, and you won't have to start that same conversation over and over again. And so I'm talking about this in terms of progression, and it seems as though things are going way too fast for us to catch up. But also would like to offer right this idea that part of the jumping in and being part of this kind of progenitor right of these new technologies, or even just kind of an interrupter of the technologies that are currently being offered, right, is this kind of invitation to kind of this imaginary space. Like it's and I'm saying this mainly because like I think folks kind of some of the fears around agency, but I don't know what to do, right? Some people are not technical people. Some people don't feel like that they have the background to do this. But we've also seen a kind of a major uptick, right, for folks from the humanities or the post humanities, right, kind of entering these technological spaces merely just to ask the question in the pipeline: Have you considered? Have you thought about these people? Did you know that you were leaving these folks out? And so I think there's plenty of opportunity to really be able to get into this newer kind of emergence civic space, right, of these technologies as they're being built, and not just kind of be reactors, but be more so, right, a part of the larger effort that's being done. Because yeah, because and somebody's making it and they're not going to stop. So what are you going to do about that?
Thank you, Philip. I I see a very interesting question. I think it's addressed probably to Tim. That is in the context of our discussion of the creator and the creature. And here is you probably seen it, Tim. We want a story in which we make something powerful, or we have extra powerful threads in technology, and then basically, and then it says, it's no mystery that our training sets are biased, racist, misogynist, and etc. We can do something about that. If we get lost in the magic of AI and our own imaginations, we fall prey to our own imaginations, not to anything that AI is or has done yet. I guess I'd like to hear what you think about these random thoughts of our own myth-making compulsions. Why do we tell these stories? Tim?
Great reflections and comments, Rachel. I agree, and it was part of what I was trying to get at, thinking of it as a kind of mystification that distracts us from everything from what we can do to what we should be paying attention to with regard to all of that. Myth making, mystification, basically kind of a, a a Marxist understanding of the kind of religious drive, that's behind some of that kind of behavior. I'd like to hear from Philip about this because I know a little bit, Philip, about your projects, and they were mentioned in the introduction as well, which have to do with using some of these computational methods in a different way that focuses on the particular and the local. One of the things that I think Rachel's question is getting at with regard to training data is the ways a lot of times these methods are about kind of absorbing a lot of particular local data and ingesting and metabolizing that in order to develop a model that's general and that aspires anyway to be universal. And I think, Philip, some of your work is really a kind of an antidote to that sort of approach, maybe. I don't mean to put you on the spot.
This is very like, all right, Tim, thanks. No, but a couple of at the AI Institute of Iliff, right? We just got finished building kind of this Black language model, and so basically we trained it on Black literature from the 1800s to the present, so about 120 years worth of literature. And so we built this kind of vertical representation from like the turn of the 20th century, like the 20s to the 50s, civil rights era, and then from like the 80s to the present. And then from that, so that's kind of like from one particular demographic. We haven't encapsulated everything we can just yet. But horizontally, we're actually going to be moving in the next direction is towards like regions and cities, right? So like what is the Black vernacular dialect in New York versus DC or Philadelphia, Atlanta, Chicago, so on and so forth. And we're doing this, right, because as Tim pointed out, like part of what we're thinking about is like the local versus general. But even as Lydia pointed out, like in the beginning, this emphasis on like these large models made by one particular demographic that's not fit for everyone else. So it has these kind of missionary qualities. What does it mean then to make something and then have everyone else kind of contort to fit the thing that you've made, as opposed to going into the spaces and then making something fit for the spaces that you find yourself? And I think that goes back to my definition of like a person, right? They're local and complex, but they're also ancient and they're grounded in like this in a geographic space. And so within that kind of framing, for us, our propensity, or at least our design or our goal, is to move more towards localized precision-based models as opposed to like generalized predictive-based models. And so that will require kind of a different relationship with the people who are on the ground, who live in these spaces, who understand their specific day-to-day life, versus like this kind of like I guess kind of mass email that everybody has to open and then kind of respond to by saying, all right, this is the general model and I ought to be a part of it or be left out, as opposed to this kind of more on kind of bottom up approach where, all right, so what does life look like for you guys every day? What kind of tools do you use? What kind of language do you use? How do you understand? And I think there was a notion to like a lack of cultural translation, but like you can see this is something that not necessarily working towards, but it's also something that we could potentially, that we kind of are doing, because not only does this model train on Black vernacular, but it also, right, the way that it generates language and its responses does reflect like these different time periods. It sounds like different versions of Black folks in these different kind of eras as well. And so again, part of the expansion of this and this proliferation is going to be, right, being in the conversation with these localized spaces, finding out what these communities understand about themselves, how they want to be represented, if they want to be represented at all, and they be part of this larger kind of consent-based model where, kind of working towards data citizenship and data ownership. Again, it's kind of like more civic approach to AI, given that it's people's data that makes it work anyway. So the people should be able to benefit from the things they contribute, whether directly or indirectly, or have it stolen from them, depending on, how it's gathered.
It's such great work, Philip. you're doing there, and the very idea of data citizenship and the politics of it. And I wonder to what extent other people are doing this kind of work. Lydia, are you aware of similar projects elsewhere that involve communities that embody the idea of data citizenship and be actively engaged with society?
I think it's amazing. It happens. It's hard. It's a heavy lift. Working with a large group is just hard. If you could just do it yourself, you would. And I think so making the effort to do that, and it's necessary for a lot of projects. There are things about civic governance. There's there's a lot of pre-AI side. I'm not sure the AI parts have made it there yet. Sorry, my kids are here to see me. But like participatory, what's it called when you sorry. Participatory budgeting, that's the word I was thinking of, where you have the community come together and vote, like, what do we care about as a community on what we should have. I think local is really important, because people know what they need locally, and anytime decision makers are too far removed from local and don't have that insight, you lose a lot of like what's important to people. And so technology does have this property that it likes to scale. Like Facebook started it, Harvard and a couple other schools, and boom, now it's the globe. And that's had also a lot of problems, because then how do you deal with the local issues and communities and make sure that they're equally well served? You have to go and talk to those people and empower them and let them tell you what they want. And it's hard, it's a lot of work, and people don't, there's a thing is like people, and I agree, everyone's individuals that have things, and so you have to find a way to synthesize all those voices. So it is very hard, but there's some simple and pretty effective things. They're largely used on smaller scales right now, but I would love to see them used more. I don't see an AI angle to that yet. That would be amazing if AI could do some of those things potentially. Maybe I should look into that.
We do have a question asking you to predict, even though you said you would not know whether, well, so here, in the next 10 to 15 years, what is the worst scenario case for super intelligence being used by bad actors? This is a question from the audience. On the other hand, you mentioned participatory budgeting. I suppose it takes a lot of work to mobilize people and then community, and also it takes resources, and so it will involve a lot of factors. Are you willing to predict where the resources will be? I'm changing the audience question, where the resources will go in terms of shaping the AI development over the next 10 to 15 years.
Okay, so a couple things in there. My personal view is I'm not so worried about the bad guys, because bad guys can be punished. If you know who's doing it and they're actively doing it, whether their weapon is a nuclear bomb or an AI or a knife or a gun or whatever, there is this theory of like we can go catch them and stop them. Whether we do that as a society is a different problem. I think that's a little different than like which technology they are proposing to use. Hitler's weapon of choice was airplanes. Actually, he was one of the first politicians to go and fly to places and give persuasive arguments. That was so, airplane, like everything can be dangerous, but it's the person really rather than the technology that I think is the root cause of that needs to be addressed. And so those aren't the cases that I'm as worried about, because we can pin it down and go and get it. So the things that I'm more worried about are things where, so for example, right now, we're really concentrating wealth in a very small group of people because of way technologies scale. And it means that a couple people can be gajillionaires and everyone else is trying to scrape by. That's it. This is a very, very solvable problem. We just choose not to, we don't. We know how to do it. We know how to tax people, for example. That is a well-known solution. Seemingly these properties are failing us, or we don't. That is outside of my expertise. But I think because we have allowed these things to happen, they start to get worse. And technology definitely has a very special property that, because it's mechanized and it scales, it allows people, and this was true in railroads and other things, but I want to draw parallels across other things to take a little bit of the focus off the AI part of it and more the other properties of AI, like its ability to scale. But another totally similar example is like, okay, so we've got drugs, and like Ronald Reagan, say no to drugs, drugs are bad, let's punish people. But then you've got like the opioid epidemic that did exactly the same things, but just through these legal channels by manipulating existing rules and systems that hadn't gotten shut down. And, you know, it's a lot of it is bribery, and, you know, you bend this rule for this person because they're rich, and all this stuff. So these are just sort of properties of human systems that it would be fantastic if we could put more resources in order to enforce rules more fairly, so that wealth doesn't concentrate and we don't allow bad things to happen through legal channels, whether those are AI things, other things, global warming. A problem I see is I worry that we're not talking about the right problems because they're not as interesting. They don't capture our imaginations. So like, I think we should be talking about the concentration of wealth and how much harder it is to get by in America and the rest of the world, and solve it. It is so solvable. So anyway, there's a lot of problems. This one seems to have eclipsed the news cycle for a long time. And I think I'm hoping it'll start to normalize, but there always seems to be something that captures the imagination, whether or not it's the most important thing in the universe.
Thank you.
That's what monsters do. They capture our imagination.
Yes, thank you. We're running out of time, but I do want to bring up Angela Zito's question here. Actually, she wrote 2 messages. So she wants to know, I think this is directed at Tim, that is, what fears is this particular demonizing of AI actualizing? And making something visible means something else is hidden. Tim mentioned climate damage. Anything else it distracts us from? And later, Angela wrote that we could substitute desire for fear. So essentially, anything else that this is distracting us from. I think this is in response to Tim's remarks.
I can start, I guess, briefly. Yeah, I think substitute for desire is interesting because I think fear and desire are really entangled in these kinds of mystifications of it. In terms of maybe responding to that and that earlier question about 10 to 15 years, I have no idea. But insofar as global computation, global AI, these large corporations are married to, we talk about that, the marriage of technology, capital, and power, I would say that this technology is going to follow capital and power.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all panelists. I think we had a great conversation here. I myself have learned a lot. I also wanted to thank the audience for your participation, in particular for all your wonderful questions. Thank you. We'll just end here.
Yes, and thank you, Lydia. Thank you to all the panelists for that fantastic discussion. And for those of you who weren't able to get your questions answered, we will get them to the panelists. And thank you all so much.